So we are ready to go. We are on live stream, just for the record. Welcome to the career panel. How were the tours this morning? Did you like them? Yeah. Okay, cool. Awesome. And this applause was for the awesome volunteers that run the tours. Some of them were also presenting this morning, so thank you so much for doubling up the work. So I'm going to start. We just have 1 hour, so I really want to give you as much time as possible to ask all your questions. So I want to start. And you already have in your program, you already saw who are the panelists today, but I want to ask them to introduce themselves anyway. And you can start to think about the question that you want to start. We have a microphone there, and there is Miriam with a gift box for whoever wants to ask a question in case you need a little bit of encouragement, okay? So I'm going to start with Dr. Ken Dawson-Scully. Can you please introduce yourself quickly and say something about your background?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Ken Dawson-Scully. I don't know if you could hear it in my accent, but I'm Canadian. So I did my education out in Canada in biology. I did an undergraduate degree in biology, a master's degree, and then a PhD. After that, I went on to work at a company called Olympus Canada for their scientific equipment division. After a year, I decided that I still wanted to pursue academia, and I went and did what's called a postdoctoral fellowship, which I'm sure you're going to hear more about today. And then I started, after 4 years of that, I went to Florida Atlantic University as an assistant professor, and that was in 2008. So I've been there for 11 years. I was full-blown assistant professor all the way through till I got my promotion as associate. And during that time, I actually started moving more into administration. And right now, I currently serve as the head of institutional partnerships here at Max Planck, where I play the role of, the liaison or interface between the university and a Max Planck. Because the way a Max Planck works, we have 84 institutes around the world, where most of them are in Germany. But the way they work is they sprout up beside a university because a Max Planck can't grant degrees. And so they must partner with the university. And it's a publicly funded research institute, Max Planck. So that way it will serve as a way to bring up the university it sprouts beside. And so that this Max Planck Florida Institute for Neuroscience, is partners with Florida Atlantic University. And I've been privileged to be able to work with and building programs that we have here. We have a PhD program. We have an international Max Planck Research School, the only one in in North America with an institute in North America. This is the only institute in the Americas, I believe.
Yes.
And then on top of that, we just started a undergraduate program. It's the only one in the world. It's called the Max Planck Honors Program between FAU and Max Planck. And we're opening up, as you saw in the table outside, in fall 20, the FAU Max Planck Academy. It's nice to see you all today. Hopefully I'll be able to answer all your questions.
Thank you, Ken. The second panelist is Dr. Mary Phillips. Some of you already met her during the tours. Can you quickly introduce yourself, Mary?
Hi, so I'm Mary Phillips. I graduated with my undergraduate degree in biology from University of Maryland at College Park. I went on and did my PhD. I recently got my PhD from University of Alabama at Birmingham, and I was in neurobiology there. I studied circuits in autism models that kind of underlie social memories and how those are formed and maintained and how that's disrupted in autism models. I came here probably just a few months ago to do my postdoctoral fellowship, and I'm in the lab of Dr. Ryohei Yasuda, and we're making molecular tools to kind of further define proteins and their involvement in how memories are stored in the brain.
Thank you so much. And the last one is Melissa Ryan. She's a post-baccalaureate here at Max Planck in the EM course. So some of you met her this morning. Can you quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Melissa Ryan. I'm originally from Virginia. I did my undergrad studies at a really small liberal arts university called Christopher Newport University, which is also in Virginia. During my time there, I worked in an eye blink conditioning lab, and then I also worked at HHMI Genelia. And then after I graduated, I came here for the post-baccalaureate program, and I've been here for about a year working in the EM Corps. And I'm working on a project that's doing correlative light and electron microscopy to kind of understand the form and function relationship in the visual cortex.
Cool. So if you already have some question, you can start to line up to the microphone. And just to break the ice, I'm going to ask the first question. I think it's a kind of hard one, I'm sorry. Can you describe your average day? Because I think we think about scientists, like what do they do all day? So Ken, do you want to start first? What do you do all day long on average?
So, I feel like I've got the best job in the world. I get the best of both worlds. I actually have a research lab. I'm a neuroscientist. And the thing that we're most interested in looking at is how do insects adapt to things like rainfall and be able to survive the lack of oxygen? Or you have an insect that's able to, on a winter Florida day, be able to get to near freezing temperatures, but then get really hot in the afternoon and continue to behave with its brain changing that many different temperatures. With the human, we have a 4-degree difference, and then we can die after having a febrile seizure. And so I get that exciting part of my job. I've also got, I have to teach. I also have to do service where I serve on a series of committees. And then I have my administrative responsibilities. So my typical day kind of tries to fit all of those things into it in moderation so that I don't leave any one of them behind because they're all equally important to me. And I find that, it's mostly trying to figure out how to balance it with a calendar. Sadly, my day is driven by a calendar, so it's meetings or responsibilities and those types of things. But I love it, so it's a great thing to look forward to every day when I wake up.
Mary, your average day.
Well, so what I love most about my days is they're not average.
I totally understand what you mean.
I think it's the most fun part is that on any given week, I'll have something different going on. So, there's a consistency in that I'll go to lab and I'll usually go to lab, I guess, and do science. So we do experiments, right? And we can do different experiments. And I enjoy a lot of getting things to work and learning how to do the right experiment for the question that I have. And so there's a lot of time spent putting that together and figuring out how to test things. And then I'll get really involved in that one experiment for about a week or two. And so that could be imaging on some of the microscopes that I showed you guys today. Or that could be doing behavior experiments with animals. And then once that experiment's done, I usually go on and start a different type of question or a different type of experiment. And so my schedule and what I'm doing will kind of drastically change, which keeps it fun and exciting for me. Then once you get to a point, you get to write it all up and present it either at a conference or write a paper. And so I might not come into lab very much then and stay at home and write or work on my presentations. So that makes it kind of fun for me. It's always different. So I don't have an average day, which I love.
Yes. Melissa, what about you?
So as part of the postbac program, I'm technically like an hourly employee, which means I'm supposed to work 40 hours a week and generally not go over that or go under too much. And so I work 40-hour work weeks. Being training, it's kind of decided based on how my boss likes to divide her time. And so my average day is a 9 to 6 with an hour for lunch. And normally I start my day by seeing if there's any seminars I want to go to or if I have any meetings planned. And then I make a short to-do list about what I want to get done. And like Mary said, like what you're going to have to spend your time doing kind of has this ebb and flow based on the workflow of your project. So some weeks I'm doing a lot of data analysis, some days I'm doing a lot of data acquisition, and that really changes. But for me, the hours are pretty consistent.
Cool. Any question from you guys yet? Yeah. So if you can line up there the microphone. So yes, if you can tell your name and your school, and then you can ask your question. Thank you. So yes, okay. So Miriam is going to help you. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Raylene Almonte. I'm from Palm Beach Gardens High School, and I enjoyed hearing about how you guys spend your days. But I also, on a more personal question, want to know how you manage your time with your family or your friends.
That's a good and tough question. Work-life balance for scientists. So, Melissa, do you want to start?
Sure. The good thing about being in the training position I am is that my work-life balance is kind of mandated based on the number of hours I can work. The type of person who could like stay in lab all day, but I'm very lucky to work in a place that forces me to not do that. So I moved down here from Virginia, so my family isn't down here, so I made a lot of friends at the Institute, and we do like game nights after work and things like that to kind of achieve that fun work-life balance.
Cool. Mary?
Yeah, so a lot of my friends are scientists because we just have a lot of common interests. And I have some really good friends in the lab, so then it doesn't quite feel like working a lot of times because you're having a fun conversation in the lab. But we go out to Abacoa every Friday night, and it's kind of what we do. I have pets, so I'm mandated to go home and take care of my dogs and let them out and that sort of thing. So that kind of requires that I'm home at a certain time. But yeah, that's...
So, I'm married and I have 2 children, one who's 17 and one who's 14, so probably very similar to you guys out there. And but remember, I got here 11 years ago, so my daughter was 6 and my son was 3 at the time, where I opened up my own lab and tried to work out this whole life-work balance. And one thing I learned was that it's really important. A lot of people would always put their career first or put their personal things first. I do think that both carry equal weight in my life. The way I learned to deal with it is my work week is pretty much like Mary's. I don't have a set schedule, and sometimes I'll be here until 9 or 10 at night. Sometimes I'll get off earlier and I get to have dinner with everyone. And my family is very flexible with that during the week, but one of the things I've done to make sure, the version of my pets is my weekend, that my weekend is dedicated to my family. So I try to spend my weekend with my family. Clearly I have things like this once in a while, which is amazing. But when I come to a regular scheduled time, I get my work done during the week, and then if I have to, I stay late, but I don't carry it home with me on the Saturday or Sunday, and that way I'm able to give all of myself to my family, and I think that kind of works for me. It's good.
Yeah. No, it'll be different with everybody, right?
Yeah.
Finding your exact balance and what you want and how much of a friend or family influence you want in your life versus science. Yeah,
Absolutely.
It's a different balance for everyone to reach.
And I guess a good thing of this job in general is that you can make your schedule up to a certain extent. So there are days in which you work more, days in which you have a little bit less, so that can be a little perk.
One of the cool parts is that, right now these guys kind of have bosses, right? Where they're working towards a career where they probably won't in a few more years, just like I did not when I was assistant professor. And I really haven't had one since, that I end up being, kind of like the dictator of my time and everything else. And so you get that freedom, and that's a big, big deal. You sacrifice other things. I could tell you, and I'm sure the stories, maybe not with you, but definitely with Mary, where my friends, when I finished my PhD, were already being promoted to CFO of this or VP of that, with a BMW and a mansion, and I was trying to figure out, can I eat meat this week based on my salary? And so that was a sacrifice I made, but for me it was worth it, and it was an amazing sacrifice to make.
Thank you. Next question?
Hi, I'm Charlie Viola from Atlantic Community High School, and my question is, where do you guys get the funds to do these experiments?
Who wants to start? I guess.
I can start if you want. For me, there's 3 specific sources. For me, I apply to 2 federal funding agencies, the NIH. So we have a grant in the lab for that. We apply to grants from the NSF. The difference is that the NIH is going to be very specifically medical in nature, how it benefits human health, where the National Science Foundation, the NSF, is more about, asking the question and looking at science as an area of discovery and basic research, not necessarily needing an application. And also things like this where you're involved, the NSF cares very much about outreach and broader impacts. That ends up being a huge part of that application. The third place where I receive my money, I actually have taken some of the technologies out of my laboratory and spun them into companies. And so we go after private funding from companies. And so that sometimes is a funding source for my work.
So yes, NIH, NSF, you get money from the government. There's also private foundations, so Max Planck gets its own money from Max Planck Foundation. You can also get Alzheimer's Association or specific disease groups that have raised their own money and fund specific grants. In autism, there's a push for specific gene-based therapies, and so they're funding a lot in that. And when they fund themselves, they can really kind of drive research in a specific area that they want to see. And so I guess we can also touch maybe on funding can come at different levels, right? So funding for you is for your laboratory and for keeping kind of big questions going, but there's also funding available at every step. So I had funding as a graduate student that came from NIH as well. It was a training grant to kind of support my graduate studies. It paid my salary there, and it also gave money into the lab. And I also just received a grant for my postdoctoral fellowship. And so they'll pay my salary here and pay money to the lab, and they also give money for traveling to conferences and expanding yourself as well. So yeah, funding is a big part of it, and it is being able to communicate your science to kind of a broader audience and talk about its pertinence to the world.
Yeah, I'd be remiss to not mention that clearly when I started my lab here, and this usually happens with every investigator, you get startup funds. So a lot of that funding for my first 5 years at Florida Atlantic University was based on taxpayer dollars through the state system. And so the Florida legislature, in essence, was my funder at that stage. Yeah.
You have anything to add? No, you're still you have time to worry about funding, so it is something that come up a little.
Post-bac, right? So
yes.
You got paid. And
yes.
Funded by the postbac program.
yeah.
So actually, the post-bac program is funded by the state of Florida. Cool. So the next question. Hi.
Hello, my name is Nicholas Lama. I go to the Benjamin School. I was wondering if you guys can talk a little bit about your direct transition from out of college into the careers in science that you've chosen.
Okay, Melissa, you're the most fresh one out of that. So how was the transition out of college?
So I knew right away when I was about to graduate college that I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to study in neuroscience, but I knew that I wanted to be doing neuroscience. So I knew that I wanted to look at post-baccalaureate programs to get more research experience. I liked the idea of having the structure of a program that will tell me more about what graduate programs are like, and I also liked the possibility of working here at such a great research institute. Another alternative way that you could do it is you could go into the workforce after college as like a research tech for a couple of years to figure out if that's what you want.
Yeah. So when I transitioned, I guess I forgot that in my bio. So I graduated from Maryland, and I had research experience in a lab, and I had kind of joined a neurobiology lab, but I was young and I didn't know what all was out there. And so I had joined one, and I was really interested in it. I actually studied crayfish and escape responses. And then I realized that there was a lot I didn't know about what research was being done elsewhere, and I didn't know if I would like that type of research. And so I took 2 years off, and I actually worked at HHMI Janelia as a research technician, and I enjoyed that. I made a good salary. And I was exposed to a completely different line of research. I made automated computer vision behavioral assays for fruit flies. And so that was a completely different side of science. And what was nice about that place is there were a lot of outside speakers that came in, and they also sent me to conferences. And so I was able to figure out that, there's these other types of research, other types of science that is out there, and I might enjoy. You're able to kind of define your scientific self a little bit and find what questions are really exciting to you. And so that time was very beneficial to me as well. And then I decided to go ahead and get my PhD. And then when you do that, I guess you're already there, but you can find a program where you do rotations in different labs, so you yet again get to see different options and continue to define your scientific self. So.
Maybe I'll answer it in kind of two parts. The first part would be that I knew that I was interested in science probably from an early age. There was something sparked in me, and I knew that I wanted a career in that no matter what. So that was something I always pursued, but it changed a lot through my education. Coming out of high school, like at the age you guys are at, I was convinced I was going to be a computer scientist. And then I went into my freshman year and learned binary. And I had to make a program that said, "Hello, my name is Ken," which was about 20 pages long of zeros and ones. And I was like, no way, this is not for me. I'm enjoying this. Don't get me wrong, now it's very different, and I think you can get around without learning binary. I don't recommend learning it. But the other piece was that after that I took my very first psychology course and my very first biology course, and I was like, oh my gosh, I love these two subjects. These are my favorite. Imagine they could be brought together. And then I learned about neuroscience, and that was it for me. One thing that you guys might not know about is that when you go and do graduate work in this field, I'd say 99% of the time, you're going to have a situation where, for example, at my university, if you do a master's or PhD, your tuition's completely waived, and you get paid to be there. We have programs where you get paid $30,000 pursuing school and getting yourself a degree, and that's for everyone. That's not just for the lucky ones. Okay, so as you look past your undergraduate years, that could be a job, right? Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, you have friends who are moving up and have a yacht now and a sweet Beamer with a convertible top, and you're not going to have that. But at the same time, there are other ways around it. I've had friends who spun out different companies. I had friends who spun out the first virtual tour for real estate and made millions of dollars while they were pursuing their degree. So I think there's lots of options if money's your thing, but it allows me to transition into kind of why I picked this career. I will tell you, all the way through my PhD and into my job at Olympus, because I transitioned from my PhD to Olympus and I wasn't thinking that I wanted to go in academia, I always thought success was making money. I thought if you made a lot of money, that would probably be success. I wasn't really thinking about the sacrifices at the time because I was kind of just interested in what I was interested in. That being said, after being at Olympus, it was an amazing job. I was making about $130,000 right out of my PhD. I was working from Tuesday to Thursday from 10 to 4. I had my own schedule. I didn't really have a boss. I'm like, this is the dream, right? But then I realized that there was all these things that what's next for me? Like, is it the next salary? Is that what I'm looking for? Or what's next for me in growth? And so I came to the actual realization that for me, success wasn't making money. It was actually waking up in the morning and can't wait to do what you're going to do that morning. And so under those pretenses, I remember having the conversation with my wife where we had a 1-year-old and a mortgage, and I'm like, I want to go back and do my postdoctoral fellowship, which, back then, I was going to transition from a $135,000 job to a $40,000 job, and it's more nowadays. It's about $50,000, if you're lucky, $60,000. But I remember that being a very hard conversation, but it was something that I actually got to learn through experience. And if someone told me that verbally, like how your parents tell you to do your homework verbally, that's not going to help. You have to learn it yourself. I had to go through that myself, and that's kind of when it clicked, and that's when I knew I wanted to do this type of career.
Thank you. Next question? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jonah Lynn representing Lake Worth High. My question is, in school we don't really do that much bench work, so how did you guys transition from not doing more book work to more bench work, and how you deal with the transition?
Who wants to take this one?
So if you're interested in doing bench work in college, you'll be taking some labs where you'll start to get a little bit of hands-on experience doing that sort of thing. And then I think the best way to do it is just to join a lab and get thrown in. When you join a lab, there's someone who will teach you these techniques, and then eventually you'll be set free to do it on your own.
So there's a lot of high school opportunities here.
Yes.
I've seen high schoolers in the labs here, and I'm sure if you seek those out, you'll start to get some bench work experience. I didn't do much of that in high school, but I was one of those kit people. I was ordering kits online. You could have your own little microscope. You can have your own little chemistry set or something. So I don't know, that kind of sparked mixing things together and doing little experiments at home. But yeah, no, definitely you can seek out high school, a lot of people will have high schoolers in the lab and get experience like that. And then definitely when you go to college, it will pick up. And you'll be able to do, like you said, labs. I joined a lab in my undergraduate university. So maybe this is a good time to talk about thinking about where you want to go to college, because different colleges have different emphasis on basic sciences. So when I went to college, we were actually right next to NIH. So we had a big, strong biology program with a lot of labs that you were able to join as an early undergraduate. And so that's something to think about as well. But definitely seek out opportunities. I'm sure there's some. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just reiterate what they both said. I would say that one of the biggest things, your biggest resource as an early scientist and making that transition is your relationship with people. And so, you think of science and, like what's the typical stereotype that, you're not so social maybe and you're kind of in the lab or whatever. It's actually quite the opposite, that the relationships you build in these environments really dictate the skills you get to learn and how far you get to go with those skills. And those people become not only a mentor to you in the beginning, but then a colleague later on when you become an expert at those skills. So it's this continuance of relationships, and I would try to emphasize the most how important these relationships are, especially for getting skills like you mentioned, getting benchtop skills.
I also maybe want to take a step as well. So we're talking about, there's something in the question about transitioning into bench work, and you haven't done it. And I want to say also that science isn't all bench work, and all science isn't reliant on bench work. So you could find that you're really enjoying questions and you're enjoying the scientific pursuit, but maybe you hate pipetting or you really don't like animals. That's okay. So I want to say that there's science for every kind of personality in that sense. So you could be a data scientist. So I had a friend who used fMRI data, did a lot of coding, a lot of data mining. He got his PhD in neurobiology as well, without ever touching a person or anything, right? It was just computer coding. On the other hand, you can be a behavioral scientist and behavioral neurobiologist. So you can mess with brain circuitries, and most of your time is spent holding mice and putting mice in a box and watching what they do when you do a manipulation. So I want to say that, if you like chemistry or you like animals, that's fantastic. But just because you're not the best person mixing and that sort of thing doesn't mean that there's not something in science for you. So there's a lot of
All great answer, I agree. And yeah, get your hands dirty if you can. And so we have opportunities here or also somewhere else to try, because someone can say, oh, this is so boring, this is not what I like. And I expected to discover something amazing every day, and I'm just facing a lot of frustration here. I'm not sure I like this. That's totally fine. And actually, I always encourage the students of your age, it's totally fine to not have an idea if this is something you like. And just try it out. Yes, next question.
Hi, I'm Caitlin DeGraff. I attend the Benjamin School. And you talked about how you got into the science sector, but what keeps you in the sector? What excites you about science now? Thank you.
So what keeps you in science? Why you didn't say, I'm done with this? I think that every scientist had a moment, at least one, in which you're like, no, I'm not doing this anymore, right? There are days like that, but what keeps you in science? That's a great question. Who wants to start?
I'll start. So mine's kind of like the same reason as why I got in. I first became interested in neuroscience because I took a class in psychology, and I found that I had questions that weren't answered yet. And so it's just kind of that feeling of curiosity and frustration of like, I want to have the answer, and in order to get the answer, I'm going to have to do some work to get there. And so that's exciting, being on the frontier of knowledge. And it's kind of what keeps me going. There are a lot of questions in science that we need people to be interested in if we're going to get the answers.
That's it. There's nothing like answering a question that's not been known. So you have a question, a burning desire to know something, and the world doesn't know it, right? And so you work and work and work, and eventually you'll figure it out, or you'll get closer to figuring things out. And there's honestly nothing like a very difficult experiment coming to fruition and you seeing it. And so you're just kind of delayed gratification and delayed rewards makes it that much better. It's difficult, it's hard, and it fails a lot of the time, but that 1% of the time that you actually get it to work beautifully and you figure something out that the world has never known, that's what keeps me in it.
Yeah, no, I think you could find that that's probably with most scientists is going to be the same answer, that it's the burning question, trying to discover something for the very first time in the history of the world. I'll give you the craziest, dumbest example, and that is, I told you we work on insects and how they can drown and be able to survive that. And one of my students started combing through the literature. This was just like maybe 2013. And she was like, I can't find anything on how long we can drown fruit flies for, or how long they can go without oxygen. No one's ever really pushed the limits on this. And I said, okay, well, let's figure out how to drown fruit flies and see how long they can live. And we did this crazy experiment, and we drowned them. And we found at certain temperatures you could drown a fruit fly for 5 days, and then when it dries off, its wings will come up and it'll fly away. And that turned into a manuscript, and it was the first time that it had ever been looked at and published. And so really not that complicated. We didn't cure anything or anything like that, but it was this being inquisitive, and I think that's kind of what drives all scientists. And to tack on even to the last thing that Mary said about, if you don't like something and you move on to different techniques, I think that's great. But you'll find that a lot of us, even if I'm working on a complex laser confocal microscope bioimaging question that's got genetic indicators and all these wonderful things, I can tell you that after the 1,000th time I've done that experiment, it's no different than now doing this with a pipetter. That being said, it's the question that drives me and keeps me interested in doing that experiment, because it's the only way I'm going to find out the answer, and that drives you through at the end of the day, that curiosity.
There's sometimes I go home and we talk about work-life balance, but sometimes there's nothing else that I want than the answer to my question. So, at that point, I work a lot, but I need to know, and so I'm going to do what I need to do to get to that answer, right? And that'll ebb and flow with frustrations, but it's kind of what gets you going.
I guess scientists are stubborn people for sure.
It will work.
Yeah, do you have a question?
I'm Leslie.
Can you come close to the microphone? Yes.
I'm Leslie Macedo, and I'm from Palm Beach Gardens High School. And I have a personal question, kind of. So what is your income, like your money, income, salary, and like how do you work around it?
That's a totally legitimate question, and actually I encourage people to think about it, because you go to college, you take student loans, so you have to think long term. So if you feel comfortable sharing a range, more or less.
As a postbac, I make about $30,000 a year, which is about on par like what I will make as a graduate student. So it's a good time to learn how to live with that. So down here, West Palm Beach is pretty expensive. So I have a roommate, and then I live pretty comfortably. I have a roommate, I have a car. I'm very lucky that I don't have student debt, and then in grad school I shouldn't accrue much more student debt. So I'm sure as life moves on, it'll get a little tighter, but right now it's pretty comfortable.
Yeah. So right now I make in the 50,000s. And so I didn't have any loans from college. I worked as a research technician. I also made about 50,000 a year, which is a little different between postbacs and technicianships, and it depends on what they're also putting back in you. So you have career development and things, whereas a technician, you have to be kind of very lucky in a place that they will push you to do that sort of stuff. Then I went to graduate school, and you're in the 30,000s. I attended graduate school in a place where that was very livable. Places like New York supplement your stipends, but it's maybe not quite enough, so you need to think about that when you go to a school, because NIH dictates the salary that graduate students and postdoctoral fellows are paid. And that's typically the same for the entire United States. So where you go to school makes a big difference for how you're going to make it work, and if your school kind of supplements based on where you are. So right now, I'm pretty comfortable. I bought a house. I'm going. It's all right. Yeah. it's not what some of my friends are making, and that's frustrating at times. But you know, I also get to pursue cool stuff all day. So, you know, it's what you choose.
Yeah, so I guess the only thing I could add to that is when you guys start going into your undergraduate studies, summer jobs, they're, you know, at Florida Atlantic University, it's between $3,000 and $5,000 for the summer. So that's something to take into consideration. I think it's a good way to spend your summers and get that kind of training. Clearly, if you go and become an academic, I already told you about the pay for sales. I will augment something about especially the pay for sales. That was set up in a weird way. I told you I made $135,000. When you get into those kind of biotech type sales type positions, which serves a lot of, like I was microscopes, but there's every type of equipment. It's called capital sales. Usually they give you a base salary. So for my base salary for that job was $40,000. And then I made 1% to 2% commission on, depending on what we sold. So one confocal laser microscope was $1 million, and I got 1% off that for every one I sold. You know, any other types of sales, I got 2 or 3%, and that brought me up to 135 easy. I remember that when I made my decision to come back and become a $40,000 a year postdoc with my Heart and Stroke Foundation award, what ended up happening was I had got enough business seeded that I would probably make about $240,000 the next year, and I gave that up. And I just remember me going back home to my wife and telling her that. I slept on the couch for a week, but super supportive after that, and supported my dreams. As you move into academia, though, it's really interesting. When I started as assistant professor, I was $60,000 for 9 months. In the U.S., you usually have a 9-month appointment, where in Canada, you get a 12-month appointment, so that would translate, I guess at that time, into about an $80,000 salary. And that was like 11 years ago. So if we hire an assistant professor now, that 9-month salary is about $75,000 to $80,000. And then what's this point of this 9 months? Well, that's from the beginning of your fall semester to the end of your spring, and that's when you have mandatory teaching, mandatory service, and mandatory research. That really ends up being a professor's kind of division within a university. But if you were to work at an institute like Max Planck or Scripps or dozens of other institutes out there, you're usually on a 12-month appointment, or a medical school at a university is a 12-month appointment as well. And sometimes the salaries are much higher. At a university, the reason why they're a bit lower is that we actually do something, it's called achieving tenure. So at the university, within the first 5 years, I was something called tenure track. I had many colleagues who would have to put a package in about your accomplishments, and then they didn't quite make the cut, and they were fired after 5 years from the university. It sounds really horrible, but it's actually, once you achieve tenure and you show that productivity, you would move yourself into a position from assistant to associate professor, and that would give you a 9% bump. And then you would also achieve tenure, which means that you have a job for life. And so whether I decide to stop doing research altogether and just get in the classroom and teach, or really augment it with service, I always have a job. There's very few situations where you would lose that tenure and get fired, where the institutes and the medical schools where you get paid much more, you can't achieve that tenure, or the tenure doesn't mean as much in terms of a lifetime job, and therefore the salary compensates for that and makes it more attractive. The last thing I'll say is that as much as a 9-month salary sounds like a bad thing, we can make up the other 3 months by either having a research grant that we pay ourselves off of, or we teach in the summer that pays some of that. But we can also go off and work for another company, consulting or doing anything like that, and that summer could be a $100,000 stint. And all of a sudden, instead of making $60,000, maybe I'm making $160,000 for the year. The amount I get paid that 3 months does not have anything to do with the university, and you're free of the university's time. But the university is really great in the sense, too, that if I have all of my 12 months accommodated, I can actually do 1 day a week, pretty much 20% of my time doing consulting, and that can bring in extra money doing that sort of thing. And clearly, what I mentioned before, I've spun out a company in the past, and then so that could also bring additional income. Lastly, I'll finish off with this. I know it's a lot to take in, but in academia, you can then pursue administration, and once you pick up a responsibility with administration, that also changes your pay. So that could also bring your salary up substantially. It's a really weird world, academia and the universities. If you want to raise as a typical academic professor, the only way you can get it a lot of the time is going out and going into the job market and getting an offer from someone else, and then playing chicken with your employer saying, I'm going to leave for this. And then they say, oh, well, see you later, or okay, we'll match it. And that's how you get your raise. And sadly, that's the way it is in academia. But again, I told you about a few other ways that could be done.
So I guess the take-home message is if you want to be millionaire before you hit 30, this is not the job, but you can totally have a comfortable life. Next question.
Hi, I'm Elena Reddick from San Lucius High School, and I was wondering how you decided on your level of higher education, how your level of higher education influences research and the amount that you can do or the independence that you have.
When you say level, you mean like degree, like
Yeah,
master's
so
or PhD
master's,
or postdoc? Okay.
yes.
So I feel like the level kind of depends on you and what you want, right? So after college, with your bachelor's degree, you're able to go and be a research technician. And if you really enjoy wet work, bench work, doing the experiments, that's great, you know. And a lot of people make a career on being a research technician, going into a research scientist or something, right, where they do a lot of the experiments. But for me, I enjoy the experiments, but I also have my own questions, and I'd like to really pursue what I'm interested in. And so to be able to run my own research program is when you need to go on and do a PhD. And so it's kind of dictated by how much how much you want to be autonomous. But eventually I will transition into a role. The idea is to become a primary investigator of my own lab, where I probably won't do any bench work anymore. I'll think a lot, I'll write grants, I'll write papers, I'll attend committees, I'll work with my lab to come up with questions and help them think about the experiments that they need to do. But the bench work will slowly start to phase out of my life, and I'm okay with that. But if that's what you really enjoy doing, then maybe you don't want to pursue being an investigator of your own lab. You want to look at different roles.
Do you have anything to add to this? That is perfect answer, right?
Yeah, I think the only thing I guess I would add is, actually I don't think there is anything to add.
Yeah, it depends on how much you want to do experiment and how much you want to be the person deciding the experiment. So how much autonomy you want to have.
Yeah, I guess I would add this. I would add that when I was confronted with this decision, I didn't know I wanted to become a principal investigator, and clearly I left academia because of that. But I did know that having a master's degree or having a PhD was never going to hurt me. That being said, that's not necessarily true either. Like when I finished my PhD, even though I went and worked with Olympus, I searched for a bunch of other jobs. I actually went and interviewed at Pfizer and Eli Lilly to see if I could become a drug rep. And they're like, no, we're taking bachelor students. Like you as a PhD, we know you're going to get bored. This is probably not for you. And so I'm like, what? No, look at me. I'm excited. But
No.
you're probably right, because why would I have done that? So I think, if you have a target of what you want to do, having that kind of information is really good. If you don't have a target, I think there's very few circumstances where it's going to cause harm to you to continue doing degrees. Like for me, and I guarantee that probably Mary feels the same way, but you can speak to that. Having a PhD was a lifetime accomplishment for me. Having that was a big deal, and it was a terminal degree. I got to the highest point of education in my field that I loved. And so to me, that was a great thing, regardless of whatever career I was going into, and I didn't have the answer for it at that time.
Cool. Yes.
I'm Ryan Sheehan. I attend Suncoast. And so my question is, are there any books or classes specifically that we could get a hold of as high school students that you think could really improve our understanding of neuroscience and just kind of the information behind it? I mean, obviously there's the internships, but
And the brain bee.
Yeah, like books and classes that you think would help out.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of classes. So the Khan Academy has come out with some things. I would strongly suggest teaching yourself to code in a lot of scientific realms right now. So computer coding is important for many different aspects. So chemists do it, molecular biologists, neurobiologists. So that can be done online or by yourself on books. Depends on what you're interested in. Honestly, there's a lot of neurobiology books out there that will teach you. I don't know. Do you have any I have fun books. Like there's like Behave that just came out. That's fantastic about the biology of behavior. There's some really great little chemistry books. I enjoyed the history of the periodic table. There's like a lot of fun science books that are out there, but learning wise.
For me, I got really interested in neuropharmacology, like abnormal psych type situations where people have these disorders that you see in your daily lives or you read about in the news, and you start reading about the basis of that, and then drugs that could actually potentially try to mitigate some of these problems. And to me, that was the most fascinating part that got me hooked in neuroscience. So I guess from my own experience, those were the kind of books I was really interested in. But back when I was your age, the internet was not a developed thing. And now that the internet exists and literally at your fingertips, you have all knowledge at your fingertips, I think you have more than enough resources to kind of Google out what you're interested in. Don't get me wrong, you got to take it all with a grain of salt and know that some of it's kind of either incorrect, or make sure that it's evidence-based stuff that you're looking at. But you have all that information. The Khan Academy is such an extraordinary resource that
there's some universities also that are broadcasting some courses,
and they're
right?
free, right? Free online. And
now,
MIT, I believe, as well.
So there's probably some free courses online you can audit, and watch. And it's going to be anything you're interested in.
Like I said before, I got interested in neuroscience because I took AP Psych. It was a really good introduction to like the basic biology of neurons, and then you can kind of explore further from there.
Those books cite things, right? So you could go on a citation. Yeah. So they'll probably say where they get some information too, and that'll send you down a rabbit hole.
And
that will never end.
Which is a good thing. I think that's an amazing thing.
Speaking of rabbit holes, there are some really interesting lectures on YouTube, but you have to take them with a grain of salt. You can, I'd say,
TED Talks, right?
Yeah, TED Talks. Get like the general lay of the field of what. And then pick out certain things you're interested in and search those more.
Yeah, and the last plug I would make is that both between the Max Planck Florida Institute, the Scripps Institute, Florida Atlantic University, which are very close to your school, we all have neuroscience lectures that are usually open to the public. And so just kind of seeing what the cutting edge stuff is that really hasn't even been put into papers yet, if that might drive some really cool things with you.
Yeah, we also have a seminar series. This coming up, this called Science Meet Music, in which we have world-famous scientists that are doing lectures that are at the level, like they are at your level. So you will be able to understand the science, and then, of course, if the topic interests you, then you can go and dig up a little bit. Cool.
I just want to say thank you for taking time out of your weekends to come here and speak with us.
Nice to meet y'all. My name is Aileen. I'm from Palm Beach Gardens High School. So my question is, what will y'all advise us, that actually want to pursue in this field, and for us to actually make it? Yeah, that's it.
Good question.
Thank you.
So my advice to you would be, don't waste your summers. If this is a field that you're really interested in, I think there are so many summer type opportunities. A lot of you will be, looking for a job in a paid way through your summer. I know Max Planck and Scripps don't accept volunteers, but the local universities do. And so you could theoretically volunteer over the summer in a research lab and really contribute to your resume, your skill set, your ability to talk about those things. So that would be
explore more if you like it too.
Yeah.
See what you like.
Yeah, that'd be my advice. Yeah.
I just say get involved, and I say get involved early if you can, because the sooner you get into lab, the sooner you'll figure out what you like about being in lab or what you don't like about being in lab.
Yeah, you might not like it. Yeah.
I don't know. I want to also say maintain your enthusiasm. I don't know,
persistence.
Do what makes you excited, and allow yourself to be excited and involved and engaged in a topic. So find what you're excited about and take it further. And
yeah, you're in a school. Do you guys have a neuroscience club in your school?
Make a neuroscience
I think
club.
you should be the president of that club.
A lot of schools do have neuroscience / brain bee clubs, so they meet, they read things about neuroscience, and they come to the brain bee. So that is a first way to learn a little bit about neuroscience and to find other students that like the same thing, so you don't feel the lonely nerd.
Hi,
Yes.
I'm Samari Torres, and I'm from Inlet Grove Community High School. And my question is, how many years of schooling did it take you to get where you are today?
How many years of what? Studying?
Like
Schooling.
schooling and
School.
studying.
Oh.
So mine's easy. I'm 4 years out in terms of schooling from high school, and then grad school adds.
So I did 4 years college. I really enjoyed my technician time, so that was 2 years, and I think that really made me a stronger applicant and better scientist. And then I did 6 years of graduate school, and postdoc I'm expecting to be 5 years. Then maybe I'll have a real job. I'll have a real job now.
So yeah, in total, I think I did a 2 years master's degree, 5 year. Well, you go to undergrad. I guess I did 5 years of my undergrad. Remember, I had that 1 year in computer science, and I could tell you I partied probably a little too hard. The drinking age in Canada is 19, and I was definitely over 19 at that point. So I had 5 years in undergrad, 2 years as a master's student, 5 years as a PhD student, 4 years as a postdoc. So it's like almost 13, 14 years, right? That being said, I think I would tell you this. Don't get so, like right now I know you guys are into this because most of you are pre-med and you're thinking, oh, looking for the future. The biggest piece of advice I can give to you is figure out how to enjoy the journey. You guys are in the most amazing time in history where you have all the information at your fingertips, that you know that there's the possibility of research opportunities and you could be at the forefront of whatever it is right now. Like, I mean, in your state of education right now too. So enjoy the journey, live the life we live now, but at your age and at your stage and everything else. Like, so don't wait for it. Don't think it's 13 years down the road after you graduate from undergrad. Think of it as you could do it now, and then once you're finished all that schooling, you're still doing what you love doing. And that's, I think, exactly what all of us have been doing, which is really cool.
And I should say, you know, I made a joke about having a real job, but graduate school was enjoyable. So graduate school was 1 year of classes, actually, and some electives. So it's not like a continuous and even the first year of classes wasn't full time.
Right.
Right, so it's not like we're saying another 13 years you're going to be in a classroom doing things, right? So my graduate school was very enjoyable. I made my own schedule. A lot of graduate school, I did a lot of the experiments that I wanted to do. So it's technically training, but it's enjoyable. It's what you want. It's what you've chosen. And so it doesn't quite feel like school as much. Yeah, it sounds long, but it doesn't feel as much like school. Yeah.
All right, I'm
And
Bismish.
Hi, before taking your question, just want to say that we would like to keep it on time, so let's try to finish the people that are lined up, and then if we still have time, we are going to take more questions. Okay, what's your question?
All right, I'm Bismish Ron. I go to Atlantic High School, and my question is, what coding languages do you mostly use in your field?
Okay, so which of you can answer to this? Which are the coding languages? Yes, Mary has the answer.
Okay. So I started in MATLAB, and back at the time, that was what everyone was using. In the neurobiology field, everyone was using MATLAB. Right now, our lab is transitioning to Python. And so those are the two that are right now at the forefront of neuroscience, in my opinion. Most things are in MATLAB or Python. Everybody was MATLAB before, but it's a paid service. And so there's a push to make it more accessible to everyone, or the codes and everything that aren't behind a paywall, which is why people are moving to Python a lot right now.
Yeah, someone once said to me that if you know Python, or you know C#, or you know whatever language, Java, it's the right structure across all languages, and between now and 2 years from now, whatever Python Mary's doing now is going to be totally different 2 years from now, but she'll adapt to it because it's the structure of the code, not really the code itself, if that makes sense.
So practice coding if you can.
There's a ton of resources now online, games even that you can start playing to teach you to code. Yeah.
Hi again. I'm Charlie Viola from Atlantic High School, and my question is, what would you say is your most fascinating finding in your career so far?
Hard pick. The most fascinating discovery you made?
I can start. I told you we spun out a company, and we actually found, I told you I'm interested in fruit flies drowning. What a weird thing to study, right? We actually found that physiologically, when you look at the brain of a fruit fly when it drowns, it shuts off its brain. And the way it shuts off its brain is it causes an electrical wave to move across its brain. It's called spreading depolarization. And that spreading depolarization, in essence, shuts down the rest of the brain until conditions return back to normal in terms of normal oxygen. If you measure the speed of that spreading depolarization, it moves at about 1.2 millimeters per minute. When we did our research online, because we're supposed to be up in the field and know our literature, if you look at different human situations where you're looking at a spreading depolarizing wave, we found that in migraine, you have waves of spreading depolarization in certain areas of human brains that lead to a migraine. And so just to remind you, how many of you have ever heard of someone or have actually had a migraine? Hands up. Okay, can someone shout out what the first symptom of a migraine is? And just to hint you, it's not pain. So what is the first thing? Aura, right? Visual, right? Some people get auditory auras. So guess what that is? That's a spreading depolarizing wave going over your visual cortex at, this is the best part, 1.2 millimeters per minute. And so we actually learned the genetic triggers in the fly that could either stop that wave or cause it to happen earlier. And clearly with migraine, we want to stop the wave. So then we found drugs that worked in the fly to stop that wave from happening. We prevented them from shutting their brains down in response to drowning. And then we moved that into a mammalian model and found that in a migraine model that, hey, we got to stop the wave. And so this led to a patent and led to a company. So for me personally in my career, that was the coolest thing that I found.
And it also demonstrated you never know where your research can bring you, right? I don't think you were thinking about migraine when you're like, let's try to drown flies and let's see how long they last. Mary?
I'm supposed to follow drowning fruit flies and migraine cures.
You worked with fruit flies too, apparently.
I did at one point, awesome. Yeah. So I'll talk about a finding that's really fascinated me and maybe how it's not done yet. So my graduate work, I used an autism mouse model and I discovered a circuit in the brain that hadn't been known before, and it regulates social memory. So if you don't have this circuit, you don't remember your own brother, actually. And in some autism models, they have difficulties with social memory. And I was able to fix it in an autism model and give them back their social memory. Well, I use computer vision to score these interactions. So all my mice are freely moving, and the computer looks at the way and how much they're interacting. And what the computer found, which was really awesome, is that we were able to fix their memory, but maybe they weren't interacting with other mice the way that a wild-type mouse would, or the way that a non-autism model mouse would. So they wanted to interact, they tried to interact socially, but they weren't able to quite match the social cues that a wild-type mouse would. And fixing parts of the circuitry didn't change the way they interacted. And so I've become really fascinated with this idea of social appropriation and how we learn that. So that was a neat finding. So I mentioned I use this computer vision, and that's quite new in the field. A lot of people haven't used that before and haven't necessarily looked at the way that animals interact and haven't had a way to quantify that in a reliable fashion. So by manipulating and using this computer program, I've been able to look at these subtle ways they interact. And now future research that I want to do is how we learn to be socially appropriate, how we learn social cues, and then how we turn that back around into action. And so that was a really neat finding, that I was able to identify that they were acting differently, and that the circuit I found, which was really important for social memory, was not at all for social appropriation. And that's work that I'm continuing to do and interested in pursuing for my career. But yeah, that was my most fun finding.
So the project I'm currently working on, is trying to understand the relationship between the form and function of cells in the primary visual cortex. So a long-held belief in the field is that there are a few large spines, which are the postsynaptic side of a synapse, that are driving the decision that a cell makes. So a cell receives thousands of inputs, and they can represent different information. And so a long-held belief is that the ones that are the more important ones are on the spines that should be larger. And we have been seeing that this isn't really the case. There's a lot of really small spines that kind of overtake the decision making. So it's kind of this idea of like the cell's decision on what to fire on is driven by democracy rather than a few really big spines. And so that's the most interesting thing that I've...
Super cool. Sorry, I do this job since a long time, but I'm still like, this is so cool. And that's how you should be if you really like science. Like, it's like, oh, I had no idea. Last question. Let's see if you can close with a boom.
Hello, my name is Joselito Joko Resas Livio Tabernella, and I'm from San Lucius High School. My question is, how do you think this institute will grow in the future? Like, would you want to upgrade the facilities? Would you want to spread it around the world? Maybe, in a way. That's my question.
It's like a perfect question to close, let's say in general. So if I understand correctly, how do we see the future of our field going? So what is going to be the next hot topic of what you are looking forward to see? Perfect last question, I guess. Who wants to start?
I think one of the big fields right now that'll continue to emerge is deep learning. And I think that maybe, I hope the field goes this way is I guess how I'm going to frame my answer. We have a lot of data sets that are really big that have only been used to investigate one thing. So there's a lot of information that hasn't been analyzed in data sets. And this has to do with the way people prepare their data before they publish. So sometimes we have big data sets that we could answer more questions with, but it's not formatted the correct way to share with the world. So I think this more collaborative approach with deep learning and big data will emerge as something in neuroscience.
That's a great answer.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so I would say, I don't know, how many of you guys have heard of Neuralink? Hands up, yeah, one. I would recommend you Google it, okay? 2, 3, great. So, I always like to think of the future as what would happen with a big Elon Musk type, vision. And so he's invested into a company that's looking at ways in which you could put, recording devices in actual brain and then be able to have that link to other devices and then be able to learn about things. I think one of our biggest challenges is trying to understand how the brain works. That's why we're all interested in neuroscience. I work with fruit flies and I look with specific things like clearly cellular phenomenon and all these things. But to be honest, the thing that drove me into neuroscience is the bigger question. How does the brain work? And how will we learn how this organ translates into all these wonderful things we do as humans? And I think that these big jumps in technology about understanding the brain more, I think is what I'm looking for in the future. That I want to see actual tools develop that gives us insight into where brains are being activated during normal thought and movement processes. We have wonderful tools now like fMRI, but you're restricted into a place. They're going to get bigger, they're going to get better. These things like Neuralink, where you're thinking way outside of the box and how do you connect two brains and just think these things. I'm hoping that more and more of these kind of crazier tools pop up, because not only will they maybe give us some gimmicks for humans and let all humans see more interest in neuroscience, but they actually give really amazing tools to us who work with animals to be able to actually dig into our questions to that next generation of question. The tools are really what takes it away. And this is one of the things that the Max Planck Institutes do. At a university, your question has to be justified by a very specific outline of what you're going to do. With the Max Planck, they feed ideas, they feed visions, and people are capable of potentially fulfilling those visions. And that's a really cool thing to go after, that you're just like a mad scientist with a specific goal in mind, and you've got all the tools at your fingertips to develop that next tool or develop that next discovery. So that's what I'm hoping for.
Thank you so much. So we should do a big round of applause. thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed. So before you leave, I will ask to fill a survey that is very useful for us to know what you think about the day and also to have ideas for next year. And I'm also going to give to the teacher the certificate for the PD hours.